Welcome to our latest episode of SIEGA. Joining us in the studio today we have Emma Portelli Bonnici. Emma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you. So let's start with something very basic, right? So for the benefit of viewers who may not be familiar with who you are, can you give us a quick introduction?
So I'm Emma, very basic, we'll start from there. I'm a lawyer. I've been an activist in various fora since approximately 2014, 2015. I particularly spend my time in activism that is about reproductive justice and reproductive rights. So I'm a pro-choice activist, which means a lot, actually, depending on who you ask. A lot of people have a lot of opinions that I believe we'll delve into at a later time.
We shall.
My work is also in private practice, so I have a law firm that I run with a business partner and another lawyer. We work on a lot of interesting cases together. Then from the personal side, I live in Rabat, which is super beautiful. I have a dog who is everything.
I'm sure very spoiled.
He is a spoiled little boy.
Judging from the smile on your face.
He is. He's amazing. And, we just make it work.
Okay, interesting. I'd like to start asking you a bit more about the work you do, and we'll delve into several aspects of it in a bit. But I'd like to start with asking you specifically, you as Emma, why it's important to you. Like, why do you care about the work you do as an activist, for example, to begin with?
So, I don't know, a lot of people have asked me in previous interviews and previous conversations even, sort of when I realized I was pro-choice. And I never had that moment, which is strange to some people, because I understand that a lot of people were raised, I don't know, staunchly Catholic, for example, and told that abortion is bad and that they'll go straight to hell and that, all of these fire and brimstone, exactly, that kind of thing. And I didn't have that. I'm fortunate enough to have been raised in a household where conversations were welcome, that it wasn't my way or the highway, that I was exposed to books and ideas, and I also went to a school that encouraged free thinking and, diversity of thought. And as such, I never had that moment.
The door was never closed.
Exactly, the door wasn't closed, so I didn't have to open it.
Yeah, okay.
But what I did have was sort of the privilege of never needing to know for quite some time. So until I was about, I would say, junior college age, 16. It had never really come up as a conversation, right? It's something that, I don't know, you see on TV. Maybe you're watching a show you like and it comes up, but never really an actual conversation with friends. And I can't remember what had sparked it, but there was first that censorship issue. That was the first year I went to junior college, where there was the Alex Veralgera story.
The Realtà story.
Exactly. That was my first week at JC. And after that, we started discussing topics that were more spicy, I don't know,
what else,
discuss.
the kind of topics that maybe elicit that kind of
Exactly. So you're reading something that had this huge ripple effect. Yeah. Uni was involved, the rector was involved, government was involved, the courts were involved. It was so much. Yeah. And you start thinking about what else elicits that kind of reaction in people and what other hot topics there are. And I mean, you're studying philosophy or your friends are, because it's a popular topic when you're in sixth form. And you have ethics and all of these things raise questions where you kind of do have to have these conversations with your friends, because where else are you really going to have these conversations? And I mean, I was surrounded by a lot of people who had the same beliefs as I did, but also a lot of people who didn't. Okay. And that was the year that there was the divorce referendum. Okay. That was the year after my second year. And in that year, I don't know if you recall, but there were a couple of people who were left off of the electoral register because it was an administrative error. It wasn't a malicious thing, to my knowledge. But I was one of those people. And to me, divorce is, again, I can't see a reason why not. my parents were separated as well at the time, so even more, I couldn't understand how people could be opposed to it. So I had spent about 5 months, right, between when I found out that I wasn't going to be eligible to vote and when the vote was actually happening, which was, I think, April of the next year, just whipping my friends into like a frenzy about it. I was like, okay, if I can't vote, you're all voting, and like we need to discuss your vote.
Interesting, okay.
So at the time I had this friend who owned a bar. There were a lot of people who used to come there after certain like religious worship classes and groups, and they were more conservative in thought.
Okay.
And I had spent like 5-6 months, like every evening, going there, and I would leave literally like hoarse, unable to like have
exhausted.
A thought, exhausted, and I was so happy that it had eventually passed. So that was sort of the foray into it, right?
Okay, interesting.
I can keep going forever.
No, but like I picked up on one thing which I'd like you to expand on, because I think it's interesting, and it also helps us segue into the next part of the questions I wanted to ask you about this, because at one point you mentioned this problem that you had with this administrative error, which ended up inadvertently depriving you of your own vote. And it's the deprivation of the vote that kind of elicited this sense of, okay, let's campaign, let's do something about it. You are pushing people around you. So I feel like that element is still not only present in you and what you do today, but it's just grown since then. This initiative, this push to drive change and conversation. So let's talk a bit about how that feeds into what you do now. Okay. So what you do now, both as an activist and as a lawyer, pretty much they overlap, and there's a lot of intersectionality there.
Is a circle.
So one of the terms I picked up, for example, from your website, I think, or a publication in which you were interviewed, was that you describe your law firm as a trauma-informed law firm. And I liked what that term signifies. And I'd like you to tell me more about this intersectionality.
Okay, so that's a lot. So effectively, what I do personally is always with intersectionality at the focus, right? Because, I mean, I'm not going to be quoting feminist literature here, but there is a really good quote that basically says that we're not free until everyone is free, right? And that is super poignant. Like, of course we're not free unless other women are free. Like, how can I fight for my rights without making sure that there are women in sort of different situations to mine, sort of women who are of a different race, of a different socioeconomic background, of a different level of education, of a different nationality even. So for me, it is important to remember that intersectionality is the key to everything that we do. Now, how does that play into being trauma-informed? Being trauma-informed requires you to have a basis of understanding of how trauma might impact a victim of a crime, right? And even if not a crime, of a set of circumstances. So we can make sure someone who reports their ex for violence goes to make a report, and we help them through it. It's the bare minimum, right, in our line of work. But we can also make sure that they are getting the support that they need behind the scenes. Because sure, we could tell them, listen, go to the police station, file a report, we'll see you in 3 years when it's your time. That happened this week, no? That there was someone who got a Tariqa for 2026.
Exactly.
It's 2024, it's solid, so not 3 years too, but still. It wasn't that much of a hyperbole, unfortunately. No. I mean, you could just be done, right? You could just be like, listen, love, like, this is a report, this is a bad thing that was done, go, make a police report, and we'll see you in court, you know? But what we do involves an element of hand-holding. And that's not to say that it's spoon-feeding or anything of the sort, but it really is hand-holding, as in, listen, like, how are you feeling at this point in time? Is there anything you need? We try to put people in touch with certain foundations that might be able to offer them help. We help with, for example, we had one client who's the father of her child wouldn't sign papers to get him into school. So we were liaising with the school, with the social workers, etc. So we go a step beyond. And I mean, we do these for private clients and also for our pro bono clients, which we have quite a number of. we also make sure that they're holistically catered for, right, and taken care of. So we have people who we've had to help escape at night into a domestic violence shelter. We have people who ended up with none of their clothes or their belongings or their kids' school books. I mean, this isn't something we can do alone. We do rely heavily on other NGOs and foundations, etc.
Serving as their liaison point.
Exactly, that's how it works, exactly. We've had meetings with social workers when there was a dispute in the shelter. We've had, you know, so many of these, I could go on for days.
I mean, they're basically direct intervention. So.
Exactly. Okay. And that is what makes us different. That's what sets us apart and what I sort of always hope that we keep as our main focus.
And before moving on to the next segment, can you sort of describe for someone who might not be informed or might not be aware of how these proceedings typically would go, what is your client's feedback? So when you go this additional step to provide this kind of support, how do they respond to it when compared to, let's say, the standard fare, typical legal support?
Generally speaking, our clients wouldn't have had a different experience yet,
because they
thankfully.
Will be their first port of call.
Exactly. Okay. But they do appreciate the additional help. They appreciate that we're reachable a lot of the time. They appreciate that we check up on them. So after a police report, which is usually a 3 to 4 hour ordeal, I mean, and that's if you don't have screaming children in the background because you couldn't get childcare. That's if people are taking you seriously. That's if the phones aren't ringing off the hook in the room, you're giving your statement. So after all of this, you know, we take them home, we'll make sure they get home, then we'll check up on them the next morning, make sure they're okay. And obviously these things are super appreciated. But I think what's even more important is their feedback when it comes to the actual systems that are in place. And the frustration and the disheartening feeling and the anger at the system, I guess, that's what it is really, at a system that doesn't really protect victims. On paper it does. On paper we have protection orders, we have police reports, we have court cases for domestic violence claims, we have maintenance, you know, has to be paid, that fathers need to maintain their kids, that mothers need to take care of their kids, etc. But in reality, what is the situation? Because it's pretty far from what is on paper, in our experience at least. And that does create a lot of frustration and anger and turmoil for nothing, really.
But that's where you can at least come in and help bridge that gap.
As much as we can, yes. But it's very hard to explain to someone that there's a 1.5 year wait for their court case to be heard, you know?
Yeah, it must be unimaginable.
It's not something that's rational. So how do you explain it, right?
I'd like to expand on the point you just made, because I feel there's the underlying current there is a very problematic systemic denial of, in that case, the right to a fair trial, the right to a due just process in which you can actually seek justice for the crimes that were committed against you. Another thing which stuck out to me and which we've already discussed in the run-up to this particular interview is the clash that there was a few weeks ago between KSU and Movement Graffiti in relation to the stand that Graffiti had set up during Freshers Week, which in a nutshell was distributing information about abortion and services related to abortion. So I feel like this is something we see a lot whenever abortion comes up in a public space, especially whenever someone speaks about it, the taboo goes beyond the psychological, it becomes physical, as happened in this case. So again, in this case, we're talking about systemic denial of information. And this is what I wanted to talk about. First of all, I know it's a loaded question, but why does the topic of abortion elicit such visceral responses? If you had to take a guess, or an educated guess of
I mean, I think the most important thing to do when discussing with someone who has an opposing view to you, regardless of what the topic is, like in this case it's abortion, is understand where they're coming from, right? Are you talking to a priest who has a background in theology and, for example, has been told that this is wrong and therefore is now repeating that it's wrong? Are you talking to someone who has their own personal trauma that has informed this? Perhaps someone who went through a very rough pregnancy or a miscarriage or loss. And that is where they're coming from, so the emotional standpoint. Or are you talking to someone who is repeating what they've heard or what they've been told? Maybe someone who's never really delved into it from, a personal point of view. Have they even sort of questioned why they're, feeling like that? And I mean, that's the jumping off point, right? And then I think when you've understood that different people have different views for different reasons, you can kind of take it from there. Now, I feel like with abortion, unfortunately, I think it's still the most taboo topic in Malta.
I think so.
I can't think of a single other topic that elicits a similar reaction and that visceral sort of rage and, not even hatred.
It's like an absolute no.
There's no room for negotiation. There's no discussion. There's no, maybe I'll listen to your viewpoint, you listen to mine, and we'll come to some mutual agreement. It's just no, no, no. I mean, that's no way to go about anything, really, especially not something that's legislated for in most normal countries, right? I mean, this isn't something, we're not reinventing the wheel here. One, abortions have been happening everywhere around the world since the dawn of time. This is just the way it is. No law is going to change that. The only thing that a law like this does is prevent safe abortions from happening. How does it prevent safe abortions from happening? So if someone wants to get an abortion, they will get an abortion. That is how it is. The law is not going to prevent that, especially our law, which still criminalizes abortion in nearly every circumstance. So even that, which is one of the harshest laws in the world on abortion, is still not enough of a deterrent to prevent people from actually getting an abortion. Because it still happens, and it will continue to happen. So what happens when it still happens, right? So generally speaking, women self-manage their abortions. They're no longer the silent scream thing that we were all taught, that I hear is still actually being shown in schools today, which is, I don't even have the words for that, but I mean...
It's propaganda.
It's propaganda, it's absolute propaganda, and it's not even real. That isn't how it works, that isn't what happens. Like, how is it that we can actually teach in an educative institution something that isn't based on fact? Like, that's shocking to me, but alas, I digress, because it's a whole other topic and another can of worms. Exactly. No, but effectively here what happens is that since abortion can be self-managed up to a certain period of gestation, people who want an abortion generally order their pills from one of the online providers of such pills. There are 2 pills that one can take. They arrive in the mail and you take them at home, in the comfort of your own home, if you are lucky enough to have one. And these are the other intersectional things that need to come into play here. You need to have access to the internet. You need to know how to speak the language that is being, provided to you on the website. You need to understand your rights. You need to even know that it's illegal, because there are certain things you can't do, right? You can't. So, I digress again. Let's be focused on this. So, when you take the first tablet, you might experience bleeding. Now, I'm not a doctor, but there is, thankfully, an abortion support doula service with pro-choice doctors who run it, that if ever someone encounters such an issue, they should be the first port of call. That's super important, because if you do go to hospital, our National Health Services, and tell them that you had an abortion and are bleeding and need their medical help, should we do that bit again, because that fly really got me. Sorry. Because it's a really important point. Okay. So if you do go to hospital, which is our National Health Services, it's what you and I pay for, right? So we should have access to it. If you go there and tell them that you're self-managing an abortion and are bleeding and haven't stopped bleeding, there is a likelihood that they will report you to the police and you will face investigation. Now, this is not to say that you should not go to hospital if you need medical care. But you should never tell them that you are having an abortion. An abortion cannot be differentiated from a natural miscarriage by doctors.
It can't be identified unless you are explicitly stating
Exactly. And that's an important point. Now, further to that point, medical professionals and social workers, etc., people who hold a warrant of the sort, do not have an obligation to report someone.
Okay.
So when they do report someone, they're doing it of their own volition. There is no overarching obligation to report.
Okay, understood.
At all. Unfortunately, as we know too well, this still happens. I mean, this happens with social workers, with doctors who are, in positions of power and authority. Doctors who tell you everything here is confidential, but somehow it's not. And this cannot continue to go on, because what is going to happen, what is eventually going to happen, because this is, this is a tinderbox, right? It's just waiting. What has happened in other countries? Women have died because they haven't had access to proper medical care when they needed it.
If I remember correctly, Ireland had...
the US,
legalizing abortion specifically because of a campaign related to the death of...
Poland is the same. So women are dying because of laws like ours. Malta's small, therefore we're less likely to have these things come to the surface. And there is also the fact that it's still a taboo. So we would really probably never find out if something happened, right? Because whose family members are going to publicize that after something like that?
So in relation to this, because we are pretty much delving into why it is a topic which elicits such responses, because if we look at the system in the way you just described it, from sort of every step of the way when it comes to a pregnancy and an abortion and sort of how that would need to proceed, the system is effectively weaponized into something, into a tool. It's essentially, this legislation essentially weaponizes healthcare against women who
seeking medical care.
Are seeking medical care, especially if it is related to abortion.
Social care, but yes.
So, and it's also interesting when you point out that even when it comes to professionals who are not legally obliged to report such instances, the, let's say, domino effect of this taboo, this overarching taboo, this constant sort of criminalization of the topic, even not just the people, but the topic itself, it's leading to this cascade sort of,
yes,
of,
it has
of
people
problems
acting
along the chain.
Every weird way, right? Like people who probably even don't believe that women should go to prison are reporting women for having abortions. Like right now, our law criminalizes the act of abortion with up to 3 years of imprisonment. Now, many people will say, but no one's actually gone to prison. I mean, I don't care personally, because if you think no one should go to prison because no one's actually gone to prison, remove the law.
Of course.
I mean, this is not rocket science. This is A plus B, this is straightforward. It's basic logic. So if you're going to tell me that no one goes to prison as is, therefore the law is fine, no. The law needs to change to make sense, right? So you can't use the fact that no one actually is sent to prison as a defense for our current law. Like that doesn't flow.
And again, it feeds into the original question, which is the fact that I think the visceral response to the topic and the way the system effectively responds viscerally as well, there is a link there which cannot be torn apart. So for the situation to change, the law also needs to be addressed, and that needs
in order for the law to change, our legislators need to change it. For our legislators to change it, they need to go out there and say the word abortion. And what happens when anyone says the word abortion? They're effectively taken to slaughter. Yeah. So who is going to give up those votes?
You've experienced this.
Oh, I have.
In politics
yes,
yourself.
I have.
You had paid a very high political price for that. So.
It was something, no regrets, because I mean, everyone had told me, just don't say it. Just,
don't bring it up.
Don't bring it up. In fairness, ironically, actually, it wasn't me who brought it up when that all happened, but I mean, I was still bringing it up because it is who I am. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not certain things,
of course.
But yes, I mean, I did. It was quite something. I mean, there were death threats, there were a case of harassment. There was a month where I did not want to leave the house. It was horrible.
So
things that people say online.
If there's one person who is familiar with
Unfortunately, there's not one, there's so many.
Of course, but I mean, since I'm talking to you and you're sitting in front of me today, it's, when you talk about this visceral response, it's not just a theoretical understanding of it, but a very real one.
I mean, there was one guy who used to write poetry about how I'm terrible and I should be going straight to hell, etc. Quite eloquent, but harassment nonetheless.
And he was publishing this online?
Oh no, online, yes. And people would comment and be like, no to abortion, not in my name. Like, no one's trying to have an abortion in your name, calm down. Like, I don't know if that's an option, but I'd love to do something like that, where I could just do something in someone else's name. I mean, all of our actions are in our own name.
I think we have a section in the criminal code for that. It's called identity fraud.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, okay, so let's pick up on this, because I want to take this further by picking up a common thread between what we just discussed so far and the other questions I have for you today. So, of course, we can't go about this interview without acknowledging the fact that just a few days ago we've commemorated the 7th anniversary since Daphne Caruana Galizia's murder. And one of the main aspects of this year's anniversary, unfortunately, was a court order which established that media discussion about the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia or the alleged conspirators behind it is now off the table, essentially. It is actually a criminal offense. So I wanted to start with that, again, since we're talking about systemic issues here, right? So from your perspective as a lawyer with such a sort of particularly ingrained focus on human rights and how that's affected by legislation, what was your response to hearing about this order for the first time? What did you make of it when you first
I mean, I think the main point that I imagine was trying to be reached in coming to that decree is that most rights are not absolute. Even human rights are not absolute, right? Mm-hmm. There needs to be a balance between the right and certain other rights that pertain to other people. Now, while I don't agree with the breadth of the order, right, of the decree, I do understand sort of the driving force behind it. Sure. And I mean, I do respect our courts and our judiciary, and I'm sure there was good reason behind it. But in the inverse, I also understand how difficult it must be from a journalistic point of view to abide by something like that. I feel like this is where I should interview you about how you're feeling about this. I mean, it's exactly mine. But it's, you know, it's not a great situation to be in as a country where freedom of expression is so limited. And we know how important journalism is. It's the fourth pillar of our democracy. I mean, without it, where would we be? You know, I feel like Daphne's murder was such a turning point for us, even as a society. I feel like the protests that led to the arrests were a huge impetus for the people to actually realize that their voice matters. Yeah. And that it is important to be, you know, where you should be, to say what you feel like is, you know, important to get off your chest. And insofar as freedom of expression is concerned, I really do think that in recent years it has been a little better in terms of people actually finding the will to express themselves.
You mean in terms of activism? And
yes,
sort of,
exactly. Activism.
Putting themselves out there,
exactly.
Let's say, in this case.
But then in the same way, you have things that are countering that. For example, I mean, we know that when Daphne's murder happened, there were so many libel cases against her. I can't even remember the number, but it was something like 50 or 60.
In the 40s and 50s,
yes, it was an inordinate amount of cases that were against her that, you know, changed her life when she was still alive, and that of her family and friends, presumably. But these are things that are incredibly concerning, right? So, again, freedom of expression, and this goes back to what I was talking about before, about abortion. Yeah. So, you're free to disagree with me if I talk about being pro-choice and I say that abortion should be legalized and that, you know, X, Y, and Z. But there is a line. You can't say, you know, she deserves to be shot or killed, and yet that is what some people do. I mean, there was a priest who called me satanic, a butcher, it was a long list, a murderer, Hitler, It was about 5 or 6 really, really strong adjectives and accusations, yes. And I mean, he's a priest, right? Eventually he apologized and I decided not to continue with it, mostly because my emotional bandwidth was at 0 at that time and I did not want to...
I imagine you must have just wanted to minimize
exactly,
the amount
like
of
it was just
related hassle.
A lot. And when I had made that police report, the police had gotten in touch with some other people who had commented on the same thread. And then it turned into, oh, look what Emma's done. She's reported this grandmother whose grandkids are going to miss her if she goes to prison for hate speech or misuse of computer. And it's like, I did not report your grandmother, but maybe you should teach your grandmother to use the internet.
When you say they, as in...
Oh, they, the big they. My main opponents who were online, like trying to rip me to shreds every day during the election.
So, effectively an orchestrated campaign.
I mean, I would say that there was some element of organization, but it came from the pro-life lobby.
Lobbies. Yeah.
I mean, there were photos of me looking like Satan. There was me superimposed onto a background of flames, which pretty cool when you take it out of a general election context. But you know, I mean, you have to admire the effort. But again, misplaced, you know, do better. Like,
I feel like you tend to sort of... Is humor your way of
dealing with everyone's like
such a level
There's
of
no
abuse?
other way.
Because I mean,
There's no
I
other
can
way.
relate to that on a certain level. When it comes to our journalism work, it can be very similar.
That's
so.
it. There's no other way. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to cry buckets, or are you going to just laugh about and try to move on, you know? Am I aware that not everyone has that, you know, ability? Entirely. But it's a learned skill, I think, at this point.
You're telling me that, you know, you've, let's say, developed your method of dealing with such abusive situations, especially when you were previously pretty much in the spotlight for quite a while. While you were describing what you experienced, one image stuck to my mind when you were describing it just now, which is that, I mean, again, you were joking about it and saying, I know it was kind of cool that I was sitting there in front of the flames and then this edited image which shows me going to hell and all that. But that vividly reminded me of the propaganda we used to see about Daphne. It's exactly the same kind of, you know, scary, terrifying witch living in the woods, we should burn her at the stake kind of image.
Exactly that.
And I wanted to ask you, especially since you've experienced it yourself and you obviously have more insight than most about it because of it, I wanted to ask you about the overlap between what Daphne experienced because she was a journalist exposing corruption and therefore, you know, not exactly in some people's good books, let's put it that way. And also because of the fact that she was a woman and she was one of the only few prominent women journalists in Malta. So what is the overlap there?
I feel like, well, firstly, what Daphne went through, what I went through could never be compared because hers was years and years of constant abuse. Mine was just, you know, a 6 to 12 month period. And then, you know, occasional sprinkles before and after, but like not the same. But I get what you mean. You can draw parallels between them because the aim behind these things is usually dehumanization and sort of creating like an evil thing that you can really hate, especially when it's not a person anymore. So you remove personhood and you just go, you know, this is evil, you know, this is easy to hate, it's easy to get... And
it's something we see with other pro-choice activists all the
time.
It's the same imagery, same methodology.
It's classic textbook, like dehumanization and attack. But to answer the rest of your question, I do feel like when women or other minorities take a prominent role, the fact that they are women or other minorities becomes the focus of, for lack of a better word, the haters, right? For whatever reason they're hating. Is it an opinion, a political stance, whatever. So it ends up being heightened, unfortunately, because of this intersectionality. So it comes back to intersectionality. So there's an opinion you disagree with, and then that opinion is being sort of promoted by a person you are not alike to, that you don't see yourself in. So it becomes like it takes on a whole new character, it develops, it grows, right? And that makes it even easier for things like this to happen. And then when you think about Daphne specifically, you go back to how the state effectively encouraged that behavior. It was on national television. It was part and parcel of people's commentary, of their speeches, of the way they act, etc. So when you create such an environment where toxicity is the order of the day, of course things like this are going to happen. And things like this being, what happened to Daphne being on the worst side of that spectrum, but activists being told that they'll be lined up and shot, right? That case is from 2018.
Case.
Still hasn't been to court to be finalized yet. It's 2024. I don't even know what to say about that. It's just shocking, right? So there are there are microaggressions. There are just, angry reacts on Facebook, which is fine, angry reacts all you want, that's fine. But there are also way worse things. I mean, I had actually reported someone for saying that he wishes that I had gotten blown up instead of Daphne. This actually went to court in a pretty timely manner, and he was found guilty. So the justice system does work, it just takes a lot of patience.
It's just slow.
And it's slow, yes. I mean, is that anyone's fault specifically? No, but it's clear that reform is needed. And it's been a long time coming,
Yeah, and I think what we've described so far is what concerns me the most about what we've discussed so far is the way in which successive layers of this dehumanization process can be applied. First, they're applied to the subject matter itself. There's this shutdown that we were talking about earlier, this visceral sort of no kind of reaction. Then there's also dehumanizing the messenger, another layer. Again, it's like the second part of it. So, okay, if I have to listen to your message, I'll still consider you to be literally subhuman.
Exactly.
And then there's even more layers when you consider someone like Daphne, for example, who also had her duty to fulfill as an investigative journalist. So, I think when we underscore this with the element of freedom of expression and the systemic denial of it, there is another thing I'd like to touch upon, which is also extremely concerning in that respect. Recently, we've heard a lot from several members of both the government and the Labour Party talking about the resurrection of criminal libel, effectively. So, again, this was something that we've mentioned already and had featured very heavily in Daphne's life and in the lives of many other journalists and activists. So, when you first heard of this discussion about bringing back criminal libel, what was your initial response?
I mean, why do we need to regress? We're not even, progressing as we should. We're going to go backwards. I mean, it was already a long time coming when it happened that, criminal libel was removed from our criminal code. That was six years ago. So why are we regressing? Go forward, not backwards. I mean, anyone offended enough to have grounds to open a libel case can do so civilly. You don't need criminal libel. I fail to see a need for it, right? So I think to do that, one is scaremongering, first and foremost, because the chilling effect that even talking about reintroducing criminal libel into our law is already palpable.
Yeah,
right. I'm sure. Exactly. I mean, I'm sure journalists are afraid of criminal libel. Why wouldn't they be? It's not one. Journalism is not exactly the highest paid profession in the world. Criminal libel would require you to have lawyers, to spend your time on it, to defend yourself, and instead of just doing so civilly as you already would, you'd have the criminal element attached to it. And I fail to understand why you need that.
Can I ask you an inverted question about this? Do you think it's because they can't do without it? Because if I think about criminal libel, if I think about all the different methods we've discussed to sort of clamp down on freedom of expression, is it possible that we're at the stage where it's an essential tool for the current administration, that it's a tool which has to be deployed at this point?
It'd be very shocking now if that were the case. But I mean, surprising, perhaps not. Disappointing immensely. But honestly, I think that if this does go further and if the government continues to push on this point, everyone needs to be up in arms about it. Because, as I said before, journalism is a fundamental tenet to our democracy. Like, how can you have the government pushing for criminal libel again? It is not normal. It is not done. Like, why criminalize journalists? If someone has an issue and feels that they have been the subject of, misinformation or slander or any such thing or defamation, they already have recourse. I fail to see the need. And if the need truly is, exactly, if that is the need, we have way bigger problems than criminal libel, which is not good. I feel like I've said not good a number of times, but it is very not good.
It's, I think that could be a t-shirt in this country.
It's very not good.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, this is what I was sort of thinking, because in my opinion here, this is what the common thread is between everything that we've discussed. There's this one undercurrent, which is what I see as a very clear and rapid deterioration of our right to freely express ourselves, to talk about subjects which should not even be taboo but nonetheless are, like abortion. So I feel like this marked decline is quite observable. I don't know how you feel about that statement, though.
No, I definitely feel like it's quite observable. And what worries me as well, I feel like I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but what does concern me is the why, right? So we're talking about the why for criminal libel, but also, like, let's go back a second. We have had people across the aisle say that they don't believe women should go to prison for having an abortion. But the law still says that women should go to prison for having an abortion. So, someone needs to explain this logic to me, because 1 + 1 does not equal window, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, this is not it. Like, what is happening? So there is a sort of cognitive dissonance here, right? So there is, you're telling me women shouldn't go to prison, and yet the law is remaining with that possible punishment. So why? And then you think about it a bit, right? So, and I think this really comes back to why things don't function as they should in certain instances in Malta. When someone is more concerned with remaining in power, they are less likely to do the right thing. If the right thing might cost them 1, 2, 3 votes. What if it could cost them 1,000 votes, right? In a country as small as ours. And then even, for example, when you think about public transport, right? To completely jump into a non-spicy topic, public transport. Everyone knows our public transport system is not as it should be. It should be better, right? I don't think that's...
There's no...
no one's really... Exactly. So why don't we have a better public transport system? Why don't we have the metro we were promised? Because a metro does not take us 5 years to build, and yet a legislature is 5 years. So what's going to happen? You're elected on day 1. Right? You start digging tunnels, you start like causing massive chaos in the name of doing something good. But the election comes around before you're done. So what are people going to be seeing when they're on their way to vote? They're going to be seeing rubble, they're going to be seeing traffic, they're going to be seeing diversions, they're going to be seeing congestion, they're going to be seeing no actual metro yet, because it takes longer than 5 years to build. So why don't we have a metro yet? Right? As in, it's clear to me, at least.
A short-sightedness.
Exactly, a short-sightedness that comes about from an inability to be long-sighted, because if you are long-sighted, people might not take that into consideration when casting their vote.
So, speaking of a lack of long-term planning, and what you've just pointed out with public transport as an example, I recently saw something which I could not help think about while you were describing this, which is recent, let's say, policy announcement, if I can call it that, because I'm not even sure, but a recent government announcement in which it was claimed that no, the government is looking towards 2050 as their sort of overarching planning goal, let's say. So in fact they called it Vision 2050, which is this so far very vague representation of policy areas which the Labour government claims to want to address better in the future. So what do you make of these kinds of announcements? Like, what do you feel about them?
It would be good if we had a vision for 2050, but right now I feel we don't even have a vision for 2024. So right now, Vision 2050 feels like a lot of fluff and a whole lot of nothing. But I would like to see our government actually put into effect the things promised in the last general elections manifesto. And actually some from the ones before, which were carried over, like a revamped sexual health policy, for example, which has been a thing since I was still an activist at uni. Like, I had a problem with that policy in 2014. It's 2024, it's literally a decade later. The policy itself is old enough to run for local council elections. So, you know, like that's something.
Yeah.
The sexual health policy, if I'm not mistaken, so 2010 to now is 14 years, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's there. It's thereabouts. It has its first ID card. It's getting those O levels, hopefully, you know, it's there. Like, and yet...
On a policy making and like lobbying level, do you get a lot of this, like, as in, do you sort of get a lot of vague promises that never go anywhere?
I mean, so I'm part of Lawyers for Choice, where I'd set up the organization. It was myself and a number of other lawyers. Some are sort of front-facing, some are less front-facing. Okay. And we are part of the Voice for Choice Coalition, which is a coalition of different organizations working towards the same aim. Mm-hmm. Within this coalition, we do have meetings with stakeholders, and I mean, sometimes they're very promising, but other times there's a lot of, you know, thank you for your work, keep it up. And I mean, I want to keep up the work. I'm going to continue being an activist. I'm sure so many other people are in the same boat, right? And I mean, I can only talk on behalf of myself here, but it is a little disheartening to be told by people who can actually make change and are not making the change, so that you can, you know, keep it up, keep going, keep working hard. And it's like, okay, but you need to work hard with me so that we can, you know, get better.
It's like a pat on the back isn't going to change policy or legislation.
Exactly, like let's change policy, let's change legislation, let's actually make things better.
Do you feel like the push for, in particular for reproductive rights like abortion, do you feel like that push has stalled at this point?
100%. I feel like when Labour tried to introduce Bill 28 successfully the first time around, which would have actually made a difference, instead what happened was, I don't have a descriptor I can say on camera for that, but can fill in this blank here. Not good. Let's go with not good. It was not good. It was very not good. And the reality is that when something is so bad, they're not about to resurrect it, right? Whose interest does it serve?
Yeah.
Right?
Politically, it was something they do not seem to be willing to touch now.
Exactly. It doesn't seem to be
volatile.
And why does it become volatile? Because the second one party says, maybe women shouldn't go to prison, the other party will say, he wants abortion legislated. And it doesn't work. When it's consistently people at each other's throats trying to score political points, you lose your Vision 20 whatever, right? Is it 2050, 2024, 20 whatever? Like, you can't come to that if you're too preoccupied with how it looks and how it will be perceived. Yeah. Because sometimes you just need to do the right thing, even if it won't be perceived too well. And plus, at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, what someone with a lot of political sway does say does impact how people will perceive it. So if you're going to sell it as X, of course it's going to be received as on fire and like a huge deal, right? But if you're going to say, listen, right now, women are being prosecuted. We don't want this to happen. We're changing the law. It doesn't mean abortion is legal. It means it's no longer criminalized, because there's a big difference. Yeah. So if we can at least agree that women who are self-managing their abortions at home, not getting it for free on the NHS, which is a different, different discussion, self-managing them at home, should not be investigated by the police and should not subsequently face criminal charges and should not subsequently go to court with the risk of being sent to actual prison, then we are already on common ground. Why can't we legislate for that? And a lot of people say, like, how I don't know, I have a very positive spin on it, that I can still hope for cross-party legislation or cross-party understandings. But I genuinely believe that if there are legislators in our parliament who do not believe that women should be going to prison for having an abortion, then they need to stand up and they need to do something about it. Because I can continue to be an activist, but I cannot change the law on my own.
Yeah, and I think this would be the sort of the last firewall that needs to be overcome. As in,
exactly.
Again, we've been talking about all these barriers, how dehumanization sort of obstacles this discussion at every step of the way, and this is the biggest one of them all. As in, there's this political unwillingness to touch the topic because of what you just described.
But unfortunately, at this point, we're either waiting for a national tragedy, like has happened in other countries, which I would not like to see.
Almost happened with Andrea Prudente's
case. Yes, exactly. That could have easily been a tragedy. I mean, this happens in other countries. Last week, or the week before, actually, there was a woman in Georgia in the US who died because of the abortion ban. There was a woman in Ireland, women in Poland. This happens. When you restrict access to safe and legal abortion, women die. It just is what it is. Now, that is either going to happen, or our government will be forced through litigation measures, either through cases like the Andrea Prudente's case or other cases that might be legislated by the ECHR, for example, to change their stance. There have already been sort of regulations that have pointed out Malta's failure in this regard, that abortion being criminalized is an issue, right? That was the CEDAW, the CEDAW directives on sort of women's rights and welfare. I need to remember what that stands for. Can I have a second there? I never remember acronyms.
It's okay.
CEDAW sends me. Yeah.
Feel free to fact check.
Yeah, I love a fact check. Exactly. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So there was recently a document published by the CEDAW sort of working group, CEDAW being the Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and it actually points out that abortion being criminalized is a problem, and that does create barriers to equality. Why does it create barriers to equality? Because, again, when women cannot control their reproductive fate and their destiny, right, then you automatically have barriers to employment, to finances, to everything, to healthcare. It's your own body, therefore it should be your own choice. It's it's such a personal thing, be honest. That's it.
What to me is an obvious fact that, it's your body, your choice, but since it's something that is so personal, it will affect literally everything else in your life. It's not just a specific
It's not a one and done. There are huge medical issues with pregnancy. It's a risky thing to do. It's not something that people should be doing lightly. And when you choose to bring children into this world, hopefully you're in the kind of position to be able to do that and enrich those children and give them the tools to be better adults and human beings and do better, and not get stuck in the same cycles. It's horrific that we think that the state can determine when I should have a child, right? And I'm sure someone watching this and talking about, being pro-life, if it's anti-choice, but anyway,
exactly.
It's not pro-life. If you're pro-life, you should be pro-women, but I digress. But someone watching it to say, but you do get to choose because you choose to have sex with whomever and, all of the different things we see online. But there are cases of rape, there are cases of incest, there are cases of abuse, there are cases of failed contraception. And again, I come back to my original point. Contraception is not even free in Malta.
Yeah.
So how are we expecting sexual health? Our sexual health strategy in this country is abstinence. I mean, something does not align. So the country's sexual health policy is abstinence. We don't have free contraception. We have a terrible sexual health education and no access to abortion. What are we trying to do?
It's failing at every
Exactly,
step
it's failing at every step. And if someone is genuinely concerned and really wants to make abortions happen less, that's how you make abortions happen less. It's not by criminalizing them. It's not by, dehumanizing the people who speak about them. It's not by, investigating women and reporting them to the authorities. It's by ensuring that you have a framework in place to minimize the need to go for an abortion. It's so simple.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. It is not a concept of a plan, it is a plan. Do this and you will not need this as often. I'm not saying this is just facts, and our legislators are ignoring these facts, right? We still do not have what we need here. So why are we shocked that we're here?
Right, we've pretty much covered every single question I wanted to ask you. Do you have a closing statement you'd like to share with my followers, maybe something that you feel like is particularly important from the discussion we've had today?
I think a good place to start is to do the right thing regardless of the repercussions, to always stand up and be counted, to go to the protests that you feel passionate about, because things don't really change if you're at home watching a protest. And a lot of people will say, but what does a protest do? But when there is strength in numbers, there's a lot that a protest can do. I mean, the protests that led to the arrests after Daphne's murder are, a perfect example of that. Would we be in this situation if there weren't those mass protests, that if we weren't out there in the rain throughout December, would that be where we are now?
Yeah.
So protest, speak, a status on Facebook, share a story on Instagram if that's all you can do. Donate to an organization you believe in if you don't want to, be public facing. Speak to people, speak to activists. Tell activists thank you for your work. Tell activists that you like what they're doing and that you appreciate their tackling of this topic, or maybe you'd like to see more of this topic and it's not really touched upon. For example, I know that it's super important in intersectionality to get different perspectives. So those perspectives can only come to us if people do come to us, We do go out and get perspectives, but it's always better if people are just, interested in the topic and want to talk to us about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good closing statement.
Be the spark, basically.
Exactly, be the spark.
Be the spark. Emma, that's it from our end. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for following us tonight. We hope you found that episode interesting, and we'll see you for the next one next month.